Hey there, it's Tom Jordan. Hey, listen, I want to start off with some breaking news that we've been following overnight. Started Thursday evening in Israel, but I'm sorry, in Amsterdam. Jews actively being attacked on the streets of Amsterdam. This is the video of it right here. Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu has asked the Dutch government in regards to this to increase their security for Israelis in the Netherlands following these violent attacks on the Maccabi Tel Aviv soccer fans in Amsterdam. This was after a match there, ahead of the UEFA match against Ajax, and were reportedly orchestrated by anti-Israel protesters. And Benjamin Netanyahu, he called the incidents premeditated. This was all planned out, stressing the need for greater protection for Israelis abroad. Protection for these Israelis and these Jews. And in response, the Israeli Defense Forces, the IDF, have now announced plans for a rescue mission. They've been going over there, led by the IDF's Home Front Command, to ensure that the safe return of these Israeli nationals plays out. Now, what we do know is the latest is that there have been apparently some abduction attempts there, but apparently all of the people that were expected to be potentially abducted in Amsterdam specifically have been accounted for, but there's been many people, dozens of people who have been injured in these violent attacks. So the IDF is getting involved here to make sure that these Israeli nationals can come back home to Israel safely. In the meantime, is Israeli President Isaac Herzog. He has condemned the attacks very publicly, obviously necessarily for him to do that, as he says the most severe anti-Semitic incident since the Hamas assault on Israel in October of 2023. And he calls this a warning sign for countries who are valuing freedom and security over these horrible attacks. Innocent people just walking around the streets of Amsterdam. Former Israeli Prime Minister Naftali Bennett also reacted with urgency. Take a look at this.
At this very moment in Amsterdam, Jews are being attacked at multiple locations with brutal force. It's a pogrom in action.
It is a pogrom in action, a pogrom. And I want to give you an update here that authorities, this is from the Jerusalem Post now, that this situation has now calmed down in the past hour. Israelis have been instructed in the Netherlands there to shelter in place because of these attacks. This is according to Dutch police, who also say that 62 have been arrested so far. So thankfully, they're taking this very seriously there in the Netherlands. In Holland, there's footage on social media, and this is some of it that we've had. But what you're seeing here, these fans are being beaten because they're Jewish, chased with knives. They were trying to chase them down with vehicles, narrowly missed being hit by these cars. And there are some eyewitnesses. They told this group called Stand With Us that they had seen these attempted stabbings of Jews. People were thrown in a river there in Amsterdam, and these extremists, these anti-Semitic, pro-Hamas, pro-Palestinian supporters, beating and spitting on Israelis. Dutch riot police were also sent in to respond to these attackers. So there's a call right now to reinforce the security abroad here, and Netanyahu's calls for increased security for Israelis is a critical step towards holding these host nations accountable for the safety of these foreign nationals, especially as anti-Semitic incidents rise in Europe and here in the United States. Same thing here. IDF measures, they're being very proactive in this, and a very swift response from Israel's military, their defense forces. And Israel is committed to protecting its citizens around the world, globally, and they'll get involved in order to do so. National security measures extend beyond the domestic borders in Israel when these Israelis face these threats abroad simply for who they are, citizens of the nation, the state of Israel. And we look at this rise of anti-Semitism in these Western societies. You know, when Herzog came out, and he's right to say this is probably the most severe attack since October 7th of 2023. Strong words by Herzog on this incident reflects this broader concern about anti-Semitism all over Europe, Western democracies got to confront these violent displays to uphold civil liberties and prevent these further societal divisions. And I got to say this too, in the United States, I think this was one of the reasons why so many people were so opposed to the Kamala Harris potential administration, because of these sympathies towards people like this, who are attacking Jews or calling for the attack on Jews and Israeli and the elimination of the Jewish state. So, listen, it's a big deal. Donald Trump's return to the White House, it's bringing a powerful shift in U.S.-Israel relations. Benjamin Netanyahu, very supportive that Donald Trump has been elected president again, and it's a major portion of the Israeli citizenship who support Donald Trump. And all these people say that Donald Trump is anti-Semitic. He's not. He's actually very, very supportive of Jews. He's got Jews in his own family, and he's been demonstrably shown his support for Israel. Jews in Israel love Donald Trump. It's like 75%, I think, support him. So American support squarely behind Israel's right to defend itself without being mired in this, Washington-driven, these compromises that we've seen over the last 3.5 years when it comes to the state of Israel. And now they're being attacked and the threat of Iran. So Joe Biden's diplomatic influence is now waning, obviously. Israel and its regional adversaries anticipate a major realignment now. What's happening there? Especially Iran and Hamas, who know that Donald Trump's maximum pressure approach will return in full force. And this win of Donald Trump is signaling this reassertion of Israel's sovereignty over its security decisions, moving away from, Joe Biden's and Kamala Harris's push for humanitarian concessions in Gaza, when it's really Hamas who is hurting their own citizens. Take out Hamas. They're the ones that are having these human rights violations and human rights abuses in there, not Israelis. In this whole idea of a two-state solution, which nobody in Israel believes is a possibility, nobody in Gaza, nobody in the West Bank want that. It's a pipe dream for Democrats. It's virtue signaling, in my view. So Netanyahu and Donald Trump's aligned vision promises stronger, more direct U.S. backing of Israel, and it basically ensures Israel's freedom to counter these threats without interference from a White House which is eager for ceasefires that compromise safety. Donald Trump's policies are going to stabilize Israel's position. It's going to encourage military autonomy and challenge Iran's regional ambitions. Yeah, Iran has some serious regional ambitions, including wiping Israel off the face of the earth. And now there's this powerful foundation for Israel to face its adversaries with firm U.S. support. We're going to get into that in more detail. The Trump election win, how that impacts the Israel-Hamas war, and for that matter, the war against Hezbollah and the Houthis and the Israeli, the Iran. Iran directly, really. Are they going to be able to attack Iran? What will Donald Trump's approach be with Iran? So we'll get into that, but also this war in Ukraine. Because remember, Donald Trump has promised to end the Ukraine war by Inauguration Day, and it really is setting up this pretty decisive shift in U.S. foreign policy, with his team exploring ways to broker peace while protecting American interests at the same time. Instead of Biden's, as long as it takes approach. If it takes 20, 30 years, we're going to keep giving you tens and hundreds of billions of dollars, Ukraine, when really this could be over. Could have been over within a week or two when it started, but Biden was weak on it. Should have never started. I agree with Donald Trump that this probably never would have happened if he was in office right there. So Trump's advisors right now, they're proposing these bold strategies, from freezing the conflict's front lines to creating a European-led demilitarized zone with no U.S. troops involved. There's talk of pressuring Ukraine to pause its NATO ambitions for 20 years in exchange for peace. That's a stance that I think signals a hard pivot away from this endless military aid and toward really a more realistic, cost-effective approach to stability in that region. Too many people are dying in this conflict. And Donald Trump says he's prioritizing a peace through strength philosophy, aiming for pretty swift and pretty smart diplomacy over the costly, open-ended commitments, keeping America secure, strong, and focused on its own priorities. So all of this is coming up in more detail in just a few seconds. I'm going to speak with Rocky Rachkovsky. He's a former lieutenant in the U.S. Army Reserves. He's been in the Michigan legislature, involved in politics, and he's a hawk on this kind of stuff. He understands overseas conflicts and foreign policy like very few do. So he'll be joining me in just a few seconds here. Also, we just want to remind you to chime in on this. You can comment, you can ask questions in the comment sections, and I'll get to those in a moment. So if you're on YouTube, just go to the comment section, put up a comment or a question there. Same with X, same with Facebook. And of course, remember, this all lives, this Tom Jordan Live podcast on Spotify and on Apple Podcasts as well. And if you're interested in helping us out, the best way you can do so is to simply subscribe to the podcasts. Click on the notification bell. We'll alert you on new content that comes out. We'll try not to bore you to death. We're trying to make this intriguing as possible, very relative, what's happening right now on this day in the world and in the United States, and, from a conservative perspective, with love in our hearts too. But also, just watch. If you share it, it's very helpful for us right here at Tom Jordan Live. All right, let's get into the Ukraine aspect of this first. This is Donald Trump's priority. He wants a swift resolution, doesn't he? He's said that many times. How does that happen? Well, he's consistently promised to end the war in Ukraine swiftly, and it is a sharp contrast to Joe Biden's ongoing as long as it takes support of this, with no deadlines, no real end game to this. So Donald Trump's pledge to halt the conflict by Inauguration Day. This is a big, bold promise and commitment. And obviously, this signals a very decisive change in U.S. foreign policy. These divergent strategies from his advisors within Trump's advisory inner circle. There are competing proposals on how to do this. Figures like Mike Pompeo advocate for a resolution that doesn't hand an apparent victory to Russia. Don't want to do that. Meantime, others like Richard Grenell, he suggests fast-tracking an end to the conflict, even if it means, Kyiv, the capital of Ukraine, making some considerable concessions. Freezing the front lines is one approach that's under consideration. Freeze the war in place as it stands right now. This would formalize the current front lines as they stand, effectively recognizing Russia's control over right now about 20% of Ukraine. So Donald Trump's advisors, they're proposing, halting Ukraine's NATO ambitions temporarily to avoid further escalation with Russia. That's something under consideration. There's a lot to talk about, a lot of things that are on the table. And NATO membership, if that's halted, it's a significant proposal. And it would require Ukraine to delay its NATO membership for at least 20 years. That's a very long time. But the whole point of NATO, right, is to protect that portion of Europe from further incursion by Russia. So if you have peace in that region, Russia agrees to staying within their lines right now, maybe there's no need for NATO membership for Ukraine for a couple of decades. Maybe, maybe not. This is all something that's going to be discussed. It's aimed at, reassuring Russia, potentially cooling the immediate tensions, stopping the conflict and allowing Ukraine to continue receiving U.S. military support without the direct involvement of American forces in these peacekeeping roles. We don't want to get our troops involved militarily. We can support them for sure. We should support Ukraine, absolutely, but for how long? And is it going to be endless? No, I don't think anybody wants that to be the case. What about this demilitarized zone that's on the table? Trump's team is discussing this plan that would be an 800-mile demilitarized zone along the front lines, much what you see like in between South Korea and North Korea. And while like U.S. troops would not be involved in this, Trump's advisor are proposing that, European allies like Germany and Poland, that they handle the peacekeeping there, keeping American boots out of Ukraine, but arming Ukraine only under conditions that, another idea is to withhold military aid. So you got to have these conditions in place. You can withhold military aid until Ukraine commits to peace talks with Russia. That's a strategy as well. And people say, well, how could you do that? How can you not support Ukraine all the way? Well, that's what Joe Biden has been doing with Israel, essentially, holding ammunition, holding weapons to Israel as they're fighting terrorists. And the same people that are supportive of that idea and opposed to Ukraine, not getting military aid until they agree to peace talks, it doesn't compute. It's hypocritical. So the approach here, I mean, listen, it's been how long now? It was February of 2022 when this all started. So we're going on, it's 2.5 years into this now. So there's got to be some more peace talks with Russia. I would support that for sure. And that approach pressures Kyiv to negotiate diplomatically for these lost territories. They want that land back. They want those territories back in Ukrainian hands. And that's important, of course, but you've got to sit down at the table and talk about how do you do that. Offering the United States as a neutral broker rather than a direct military supporter. Ukraine's uncertain response, there's Zelensky here. His government relies heavily on U.S. military and financial aid, and he does like Donald Trump. He's made that clear. And making Trump's proposal potentially effective and pushing Ukraine to negotiate might be a strategy. However, there is tension. There's support there, but there's also tension. Zelensky's domestic supporters largely view territorial concessions as surrender to Moscow. So you give them land, that's essentially surrender, even if it leads to peace. That's the mindset. So that's a major challenge. Russian reluctance as well. Let's talk about them. They don't want to negotiate. The Kremlin's, special military operation goals remain unchanged so far. At least that's what they're saying. And Russia's slow but steady advancement show its reluctance for diplomacy. Donald Trump's team has got to navigate Russia's uncompromising stance here, put some pressure on them, which Donald Trump is known to do, as Moscow has shown really little interest in peace talks and may even escalate outside Ukraine's borders. That's the major concern. So resistance from NATO allies, these allies see Russia as an immediate threat, like right now. And Trump's plan could face pushback from European leaders. Finland's foreign minister recently stressed that negotiations should only occur with Ukraine's agreement and control over the terms of that, an approach at odds with Trump's fast-track proposals. Zelensky's skepticism with this whole plan, with Trump being able to do this so quickly. And Trump has been very critical of Zelensky as well, as the greatest salesman, has Kyiv concerned that a Trump administration might favor Russia in his negotiations. They don't want that. So Zelensky, he's congratulated Donald Trump on his win and has expressed his willingness to cooperate in this. And there's underlying anxiety in all this about being pressured into a settlement that could undercut Ukraine's sovereignty. So that's the concern. It is a very complicated situation there. How do you bring this to a peaceful end where both sides are at least somewhat happy, but at least people aren't, continuing to be killed on the battlefield between Ukraine and Russia? That's something that Donald Trump says will be a priority even prior to his inauguration day. All right, let's switch over now to the conflict in the Middle East. Trump's comeback has really stirred the pot, a bit for Israel's multiple conflicts. Trump's victory, Israel sees, a potential shift back to staunch support without pressure for these ceasefires. Like, let us finish the job with Hamas. Those ceasefires were limiting Israel's military goals. Joe Biden, while fully supportive of Ukraine, was not fully supportive of Israel. So Donald Trump's administration, has historically, there's case studies now to show that Donald Trump has favored a strong pro-Israel stance, leaving Israel freer to focus on its security rather than political compromises with the Biden administration. So a Donald Trump win in this election signals a pretty significant game change with Iran. Trump's previous maximum pressure strategy toward Iran, including, pulling out of the nuclear deal with Iran, which should have been more celebrated because they were building nukes anyway, and signaled strong opposition to Iran's regional ambitions. Israel anticipates similar support as Donald Trump gave them in his first term, and that he's going to back any strong measures Israel might take to counter Iran's nuclear aspiration. We say strong measures. We mean that. Israel is very serious about protecting its sovereignty. Remember, never again. That's their mantra. Never again. Speaking of the Holocaust and Adolf Hitler, they hated Adolf Hitler and they loved Donald Trump. I should say a lot of people who are saying that Donald Trump is Hitler. No, he's not. He's the opposite, especially as it relates to Israel. So Joe Biden, what's going to happen? He's got 3 months remaining, right? This could be kind of a deadlock period. Joe Biden now kind of a lame duck on Middle East diplomacy, and he faces a whole lot of difficulty in crafting these long-lasting deals because he's out of here. And Israel and its opponents may both opt out and just kind of wait until Donald Trump takes office, expecting him to maybe reject or undo any arrangements Joe Biden attempts to put into place in his final 3 months of his presidency. So especially if they don't like or they don't align with pro-Israel policies, which is more likely than not to be the case. So Donald Trump's approach, it will likely encourage Israeli autonomy. And the narrative that's out there absolutely shows that to be the case. And, Trump's approach is, historically, when you look at what Donald Trump has already done in his first term, he's got strong support for Israel's sovereignty. It is their state. It is their country. And they got to make their own security decisions to do what's best for their nation. From recognizing Jerusalem as his capital, Donald Trump did that. He moved the embassy to Jerusalem from Tel Aviv, to backing its West Bank settlements. This return promises more Israeli control over military and political actions without U.S. pressure for compromises, which always seems to undercut Israel. It always seems to favor the Palestinians over Israel. So Palestinian hopes fade with a Trump White House. In a moment here, we'll get Rocky Rachkovsky to join us. Cameron, is he? He's not here. So, all right, Rocky is going to give us a ring here. So we'll continue this discussion as you're looking at, that's eastern Lebanon there, and as Israel is attacking Hezbollah, a major foe who also wants the elimination of Israel. Remember, Israel is surrounded by its enemies. Gaza right there, and Hamas. Remember Israel, they agreed to move their settlements out of Gaza for peace back, 2005 that had occurred? And what has happened since then? Gaza there, the Palestinians, Hamas, they keep launching massive amounts of rockets into Israel during that time. So finally, after this attack on October 7, 2023, they said enough is enough. We're getting rid of Hamas because they're a constant threat. There was no peace when Israel agreed to concede that land of Gaza. All right, I think we have a comment here. Let's bring in a comment here from our great viewers and listeners here. Carlane Hodges, my husband and I love the show. We all know President Trump will stop the wars. He did not get respect for bringing remains of the veterans from the Korean War. How do you think media will spin this? I listen, thank you for your kind word. And I wonder if Orlando is your husband there. A great man. I appreciate him. And Carlane, it's wonderful to hear from you. Thank you so much. I agree with you, first of all, that he is going to stop the wars. That's what he did when he was in his first term. Remember when Barack Obama was president, this is 2013 timeframe, 2014, that Russia had invaded Ukraine during Barack Obama's watch. And they took that Crimea region, and there was no real world help from the United States for Ukraine to push back against Russia. So Russia was just kind of fat and happy there, taking back Crimea And you talk about these foreign countries inhabiting other states like they did with Ukraine, Russia did with Ukraine. There wasn't enough pushback, but Donald Trump comes in and he was very forceful and supportive of Ukraine against Russia. And the media narrative was that somehow Donald Trump is in cahoots with Russia. It was all a lie. Vladimir Putin is afraid of Donald Trump. And it's one of those things that Donald Trump does really well. He keeps his enemies close. You have to talk with them because you have to remind them what you will do if Vladimir Putin does something that Trump doesn't want. Trump says, I'm going to blow the little turrets off of the Kremlin if you go into Crimea or if you go back into Ukraine. That's what I will do, Vlad, he says with a smile. So it's that peace through strength. And there's another major reason why you can't no longer trust the media because the narrative was just the opposite. So I want to bring in Rocky Rachkovsky joining me now. Rocky, it's so good to have you. I know you served many, many years in the U.S. Army. You were a lieutenant with the Army Reserves, and you've been, in legislative duty in Michigan as well. So you understand the political nature of what's happening here and the military nature as well. So I want to get into what's happening with Donald Trump's election in both these areas of war, the Middle East and also in Ukraine. But before I get to that, your thoughts on what's happening in the Netherlands right now with this basically pogrom that's occurring with the attack on Jews in Amsterdam and the IDF even going in from their home country to stop this from occurring. I mean, I don't know how much you've been paying attention to that. I'm sure you have because you got your finger on the pulse of what's happening overseas. But this is seemingly a constant threat that Jews face overseas and particularly in these Western societies.
Absolutely. First time, thank you for having me on the show again. And I was a lieutenant colonel actually in the United States Army. Not
Lieutenant
just a
Colonel,
lieutenant.
yeah, sorry, thank you for
I was a
correcting
lieutenant many, many years ago, but that's all right. Hey, no, you're absolutely correct, and that is, we think back in history, and it's time before we were even born potentially. The Munich situation,
me.
where Israel saw what happened to Israeli Olympic athletes and how they took vengeance on them and let the world hear one specific word, and that word was deterrence, that never again, and that there is a deterrence that if you try to harm one of our citizens, we will harm you or hunt you down. And what has happened, what we understand now is that Netanyahu actually, with his new defense minister, dispatched not only planes but also soldiers and security personnel, what's commonly referred to as a PSD, a personal security detail, soldiers that have been trained in security of individuals to get these individuals that have been attacked in the Netherlands out and out of the Dutch area and on these planes and back to Israel to safety.
What has been the Dutch response to this? Because they're hosting these games, soccer matches there, football as they call it over there. And I know Dutch police have responded to this and they're taking people into custody. But, was security just not tight enough? I mean, could they not anticipate the fact that you got an Israeli soccer team playing in really in hostile territory? Much of Europe is hostile territory nowadays to Jews. Were they just not anticipating this? Or do you think there's any I don't want to say any purposeful loopholes in security, but what's your assessment of what happened and what led to this?
I really don't think that they were prepared for something like this, nor did they anticipate any of this. And that's the big issue, especially seeing that there was an Israeli team. They really, I just think that they had their security on the ground and they were able to break up some of the fights from what I'm understanding, what I'm reading. But again, it's something that I'm not sure if they were truly thinking about or prepared for.
Well, okay, let's shift that since we're talking about, Israel specifically. Let's talk now more about what's happening in Israel and this push by Netanyahu and Israelis to root out Hamas. And it's been a very difficult thing to do when the United States under the Biden-Harris administration has not been as willing to fully support Israel in this as they have been to fully supporting Ukraine against the Russians. And that's always been a troubling to me because it seems hypocritical. We have our number one ally in the region is Israel, and we're asking them to stop fighting a terrorist organization. So Trump now returns to the White House. He's going in there, and that's effectively halted Joe Biden's diplomatic efforts. How do you foresee this playing out? Because I know that Hamas has already, seemingly reacted to the fact that they know Donald Trump is coming soon.
Well, first off, we do have a federal law that prevents a incoming president from acting as president until they take office. But you're absolutely right. Just the election alone has sent a ripple wave across the world that the administration of 4 years ago is back, and that peace through strength and deterrence will be the touchstones or the vanguard or the cornerstones of this administration. So you are seeing that specific reaction, especially from Hamas and from others. Hamas now is actually more willing to enter the peace negotiations and come up with a peace agreement again. And I truly state that it's basically because of the election of Donald Trump.
Yeah. Let me ask you about that, though, because, Hamas entered into a so called peace agreement with Israel in order for Israel to leave Gaza back in the 2005 timeframe. But ever since then, they've been firing rockets, ad nauseum into Israel. And Israel, thankfully, has an Iron Dome, and they've largely been able to protect its people from these consistent attacks by Hamas. So let's say Hamas comes to the table and agrees to peace. Is that something Benjamin Netanyahu would take seriously based on not only their, history from 2005, but very recent history as well?
I think so. I think you will take that seriously. But what it will include is not just returning the hostages and a peace deal, but it will also require specific uh, safeguards that Israel will demand, so that they can make sure that that peace agreement isn't broken again. And I think those safeguards are going to be important with making sure that the Gaza Strip or the West Bank are weapons-free zones. Because quite frankly, what we see is when Israel lays down their or when the enemies of Israel lay down their weapons, we have peace. But when the enemies of Israel have weapons and Israel lays down their guard, then there is war. And we've seen that historically, not just on the October 7th attack, but you've seen that back to the 70s, to 73, to the Yom Kippur War, to all the wars before and after the creation of the state of Israel again, in 1948. So, uh, from my perspective, I think that any peace deal is going to also require a demilitarization of the Gaza Strip as well as the Western Bank.
Yeah, that would be a smart move. I'm curious about this because Joe Biden is essentially now a lame duck in this country and also in his, overseas relationships with, Israel. And I wonder if, Hamas might think it might be better for us. We'll get more favorable terms if we make the deal right now that Joe Biden is still in office before
I
Donald
agree.
Trump comes in. But does Benjamin Netanyahu say that doesn't matter at all to us any longer, whether it's Joe Biden or Trump, because Trump will kind of let them have free reign. Does Benjamin Netanyahu think that right now he already has free reign? Because, like I said, Joe Biden is a lame duck.
Oh, I'm not sure if the United States role or that Donald Trump will give anyone free reign. I think that Donald Trump does have a moral compass, but Israel is obviously defending their property and creating again a narrative of deterrence, and that is in line with the Trump doctrine or what Trump believes in. If you have deterrence, you have enemies that are actually concerned that if they attack you, that you will unleash what's called the war of hell or hell upon them. And at that point, it makes you consider twice or think about it twice if you should attack or should not attack. But again, I think that Israel will do what's best for Israel, and the United States plays a role in that, but not as major of a role as it did in the past. And we
Yeah,
see
it's
that
a role of support, is what the United States in, and
exactly,
and
exactly.
that's what I mean by they're free to do what they would like to do based on the support the United States will give them to do what's best for Israel, rather than what's best for Gaza or Hamas or Hezbollah or the Houthis or whoever, Iran specifically. And so I do wonder about Iran because Donald Trump has historically taken a very, very tough stance against Iran. and they don't like each other. And we saw what Donald Trump did with the Taliban and how he was not afraid of them. You know, he was telling the leaders of the Taliban that he is going to do this to them specifically and very personally if they didn't do what Donald Trump wanted them to do. Do you think Donald Trump right now has that kind of leverage over, the head of the snake, Iran specifically?
I think so, but again, not until he takes office. And Hamas takes their orders from Tehran, which is the capital of Iran, as you know. So we'll see what happens with the Middle East, but I truly believe that Donald Trump has already made it very clear that he's not a man of war, but he's not afraid of unleashing war if war is unleashed on Americans. The other issue is Donald Trump uses diplomacy and negotiations in a way that's never been used before. He will stranglehold a country's finances by using our allies, using the banking system, using whatever he needs to do. And that's exactly what took place with Iran when he pulled out of the nuclear deal with Iran, the JCPA, and also by making sure that other countries, our allies, were not buying any type of Iranian oil or obviously mislabeled Iranian oil, which means
Hmm.
that Iran sold it to a third party and a third party then sold it to other nations to make money. And
Right.
basically, with that and frozen assets, he was able to stranglehold the finances of Iran. And we have also seen in Russia, Russia's also going through a little bit of turmoil. If they're not able to sell oil on the open market or to allies of the United States, or use dollars to buy or sell that oil, then you'll see Russia having issues financially, more issues than they have had in the past. They can't just sell their oil to China and India without any backlash of the United States. And what's also interesting that people aren't talking about is India. The relationship between President Modi or Prime Minister Modi of India and Donald Trump is very, very good and very positive. And India has actually purchased a lot of oil from Russia, has actually worked with Iran and Russia on economic ties, and are part of this BRICS movement. And with Donald Trump back in the White House, it again strengthens the dollar and creates that relationship between, by the way, the largest English speaking democracies in the world, which is India, and the United States, as we have in the past. And if the United States and India are in line, and the United States and Europe are in line, and everyone does their part, then we have just basically been able to crush the new axis of evil, being Iran, Russia, China, and North Korea, financially as well as economically.
Right. Yeah, because we saw the reaction of, China's President Xi Jinping, and he was not happy that Trump was reelected to office. So what does
But
that what
Todd,
does that say about China? Huh?
I got to tell you, that's also done without a drop of blood, and that's
That's
the key.
what? Say again?
It's also been done without a drop of blood, and
Yes.
that is the key.
Well, that's peace through strength, right?
Correct.
That's the Ronald Reagan kind of doctrine as well. That you project strength, it leads to peace. And it's got to be, a projection, authenticity matters here, right? Sincere strength
Absolutely.
being projected across
Absolutely.
the world. And Donald Trump has already proven himself. So what does that mean, do you think, for China and China's, growing strength, not just around the world, but particularly here in the United States
Well, I
and
think
that region in Asia too?
I think it slows down China's move towards Taiwan. It's not a secret that China planned on potentially invading Taiwan around 2027. And if Kamala Harris would have been the president, again, we don't have a crystal ball. We can't look into the past, but I would venture to guess that I would assume that they would have probably maybe sped up those plans. Now with Donald Trump in office, that's been something that will be slowed down, and you're going to see a lot of communication between China and the United States, and you're going to see Chinese, I believe, more cyber attacks, more third party attacks, and obviously their strengthened relationship with Russia. And then you're also going to see communications between Trump and Xi, which is going to be very interesting to watch because
Yeah.
Trump has not been afraid of saying that he will use tariffs against Chinese goods.
Right, and it's good that he'll meet with anybody. We have people watching, and they want to comment now that you're with us right now, and so we're gonna have Cameron
And I
Harris. Cameron's good.
apologize. I
No, no.
apologize, Tom. I haven't been. I've been working with a little bit of sleep, so
Oh, I know. Me too. It's been a long, long week for a lot of people like
yeah.
yourself, Josue. Hey, our friend Orlando Hodges here. He's with the program right now, Lieutenant Colonel, aka the Rocky. How difficult will it be for President Trump to get the hostages back? What do you think?
Well, I think that that's any part of any type of negotiations, Orlando, especially now that Hamas is back at the table. I think that that's number one is to make sure that the hostages are returned, the ones that are alive. I hate to be so morbid this early in the morning, but it's true that there will be others that we will find out that have passed during captivity. And that number of 100, whatever it is, 113, will go down significantly. I truly believe that. And it's sad to me that we'll hear about that, but I believe that the hostages, that issue has to be number one. Number two has to be the demilitarization of the Gaza Strip as well as the Western Bank. And then number three will be all the rest of the details that will be worked out. I also think that President Trump will put pressure on Qatar, the nation of Qatar, where Hamas has their offices and their luxury suites, where their leaders, where their current leaders and they're out of the Middle East region in that area, but more on the east, are enjoying the lap of luxury of Qatar and beautiful dinners and billions of dollars that they have in their banks there. And I think the president will put pressure on Qatar and other nations to fall in line and help with those peace negotiations.
Yeah, that's key. What because if you really want to root out Hamas, you got to go to Qatar. I've gone back and forth in the pronunciation. Qatar. I like the way you say it best. I think you're more authentic in your
My wife is
pronunciation.
Lebanese, so I've learned the Arabic way of pronouncing.
Good. Yeah. Met your wife. Very nice Lebanese woman. Thank you. Let's take another comment. Orlando, thanks for that comment. Appreciate it very much. Harold Sakalian. Good morning, Tom. Is the Trump administration prohibited from talking to world leaders before Inauguration Day? Love your new platform. We are spreading the word about your new show. Good luck, Harry. Harry, thank you very much for your support. I appreciate it. And it's a fantastic question. I know, Rocky, you kind of touched on this a little bit in terms of acting as president prior to Inauguration Day, but can he speak, Donald Trump, with world leaders prior to then?
Good morning, Harold. Shanora Galim. I have to say that he's not prohibited from speaking to world leaders. No American citizen is prohibited from speaking to a world leader. We've seen Armin Hammer, yeah, I believe it was Armin Hammer, went to Russia and spoke with, I believe at that time it was Medvedev and Putin. So a
Yep.
citizen can speak to anyone they want. It's making treaties or negotiating something on behalf of the United States before they take office. That's the federal law that prevents them from doing this. But the president can say what his positions are without forcing a world leader to agree or disagree. So they can have those conversations before, but they can't talk about the negotiations of forcing a world leader or a other nation to accept a position without
Right.
the administration being there.
Great answer. And it makes you wonder about, General Michael Flynn, when you talk to the Russian ambassador prior to taking office and why
Yeah,
that was such a big deal. And John Kerry, the Democrat, is out there talking with Iran directly, undercutting Donald Trump's presidency. And he kind of skates away with being allowed to do that kind of stuff. It's ironic, but yeah, it's can't make deals. But you can certainly talk to whoever you want to. Great answer. We're going to take some more questions in a moment, but I want to get over to now what's happening in Ukraine because Donald Trump has made some very bold proclamations that if he's elected, he will be able to end this conflict. He would like to do it prior to Inauguration Day, and there's a lot of ideas on the table. And talk about a demilitarized zone. That's one of them, and maybe conceding part of Ukraine to Russia in order to stop the war. Maybe delay NATO membership for Ukraine for a couple decades. All these ideas. How do you foresee this potentially playing out? And is it possible that this could be ended by Inauguration Day?
well, I'm not sure. Again, I do not believe it will end before Inauguration Day. It will obviously deal with ending it after the inauguration. And I truly believe that both sides are war. They're burdened by the war, and they're obviously tired of war. You've seen so many Russian losing over 300,000, 320, 330,000 of their men or injured or lost or injured, and Ukraine also going through massive losses of their young men,
Mm.
of their future, of their nation's future. So I believe that both nations are looking for an end to this war in some way. And I truly believe that Donald Trump may be onto something. And that is, if you give something to Russia and you take care of Ukraine, um, what I would love to see, I would love to see Russia take a small portion of the east of Ukraine, not the southeast, not the industrial area of the Donbass, but the northeast, small area, and then allow for Ukraine to be entered into NATO. That will then, for sure, prevent any future attack and create a buffer zone, but also Article 5 of protection of Ukraine and their sovereignty would take an effect. Because many people may not realize, and I'm a conservative that actually supports our support of Ukraine. Without boots on the ground, this is one of the best intelligence as well as support of world peace that we could do by just spending some money on allowing the nation to defend itself, the Ukrainian nation and the Ukrainian people to defend themselves. And you're, for the first time ever, and by the way, this is because of the Trump doctrine of strengthening NATO. Uh, Trump woke up NATO, and the second wake up of NATO was under Biden. And the Trump waking up NATO was, hey, pay your share, which was more positive. The second one of Biden was negative, and that was he had basically allowed and seceded, allowing the Russians to invade Ukraine without any consequences. And the reason why I say this is because many people do not realize that we had an agreement with Ukraine, Russia, and the United States,
Hmm.
and actually NATO was a participant to this, but the U.S. signed the agreement, and it was the Helsinki Accord that allowed for the protection of Ukraine's sovereignty if Ukraine gave up their nuclear weapons back to Russia. Because
All right.
on Russian soil, they had nuclear weapons and they had nuclear reactors that were providing energy to the region. So to provide that security and that safety and to clean up Ukraine from these biolabs or anything else that Russia had, we created the Helsinki Accord that created for their sovereignty and their protection. And we signed that agreement. And if we don't stand by that agreement, it means absolutely nothing. Our word means absolutely nothing to our allies.
Yeah,
And
we've been
that's
standing by that agreement as promised.
yeah,
That's a very important point because you're right. A lot of people don't realize we have that. There's the Budapest Memorandum that means that we've got to defend Ukraine's sovereignty against, specifically
absolutely.
Russia. And the nuclear, they gave up the nuclear arms in order for that to take place, and that was the agreement with Russia. And then Russia still invades, so we have to do that. The question becomes, how much do we continue? Now, $200 billion plus so far in U.S. taxpayers. It doesn't say we have to pay a certain amount. We just have to help defend them along with NATO. So you bring up NATO, and Ukraine very much wants to be a member of NATO. But one of the ideas out there is, listen, if Ukraine can give up its pursuit of a NATO membership for 20 years, and Russia agrees to that to stop the hostilities for that duration of time, maybe that's Trump's advisors. That's one of the they say solutions of doing that. Do you think that's feasible? Do you think that would be smart, or would that not provide Ukraine with the protection they need?
And thank you, by the way, for correcting me. I apologize. I'm a little bit tired, so I
No,
made a
no, no, no.
mistake.
That's fine.
You're correct on the
I
Budapest.
did. I corrected you in a nicer way than you correct me. I'll just let you know that.
I well,
I'm
you
messing
you
with you.
should be corrected, Tom. No, I'm kidding. I'm kidding. You're a good friend, and I
Oh, of
appreciate
course.
it.
Yeah.
And I'm very proud of what you're doing, and I hope that your voice keeps resonating in the region. And you're a good voice, and we need to have you. But your question, I think that one way or the other, what I proposed or what others are proposing outside are basically the same mirror images, just from different perspectives.
Mm.
And NATO is going to play a role one way or the other, either a an agreement of not entering NATO or an agreement of entering NATO, but there will be some type of agreement because both of these parties are just slogging each other, and it's becoming a meat grinder instead of a war.
Does NATO need to step it up a little bit? I mean, in terms of really, maybe it's Germany, handling the peacekeeping efforts over there in a larger way than they are right now?
You mentioned Germany, and I got to tell you, being Polish, of Polish descent, Germany's military is not that good anymore. It's
Hmm.
not solid anymore. The two world powers, or the two powers in Europe now, when you look at the bookends of Europe, are Great Britain on one side on the west and Poland on the east. And being a son of Polish immigrants, my father always was proud of the relationship between Poland and the United States. Poland was never red; they were never communist. Uh, they resented the Eastern Bloc and
Hmm.
Russia, and
Hmm.
therefore Poland has been the first one to celebrate the freedoms and revigorate the Constitution that they had for the people, which, by the way, mirrors the United States Constitution because it was brought as an example by General Kosciuszko and Pulaski. We hear of a lot of parades here, so a little bit of Polish ringing here, being a Polish American. But
I never
I'm
would have
going
thought with the last name of Rajkowski that you were Polish, but continue,
Yes,
please.
yes, yeah, but quite frankly, when you bring up Russia and Germany, it would be the Polish forces, be the English, be NATO as a whole that would obviously play a bigger role. But now we're seeing the United States play a larger role. And why I bring up Poland is because the United States is playing an even larger role of moving bases out of Germany and into Poland. And you're also seeing uh, Poland purchased more M1 tanks than any other nation in the world except the United States. And these are US made tanks.
Yeah.
Poland purchasing more F 35 fifth and sixth generator strike fighters than any other nation in the world except for the United States. Poland purchasing more Apache helicopters than any other nation in the world except the United States. And these are all United States weapon systems. So Poland has dropped all of its Warsaw Pact, all of its weapon systems, and gone and given them to Ukraine to fight against the Russians, and repurchased brand new U.S. weapons in the NATO weapon systems and communication devices. So Poland
Yeah.
is obviously the vanguard on the east now.
Yeah, I loved the ability now to celebrate Poland and their strength in Europe is a wonderful thing to see after what we saw. We all remember what it was like there, and I remember the 1980s, 70s, and 80s under Soviet rule. So it's a wonderful thing to see, and they are right there,
Sorry.
major support of defending Ukraine because they're bordering Ukraine as well. They don't want the former Soviets, the Russians, coming into their neck of the woods either. So they are stepping up, maybe more so, obviously more so than Germany has the capacity to do so. We have more comments and questions here. Let's bring up one right now. Cameron's going to throw up one here from Orlando Hodges is back. Do you think President Trump will find a way to get rid of illegal forces in the USA with allies of Iran and China? What do you think of that?
I'm going to say something that'll get me a little bit in trouble here. I
That's
think
good. We
that
like that.
Okay, I think the president will use, and his people will use the Patriot Act
Hmm.
to hunt down those terrorists and those terrorist cells that have been dormant in the United States. And when I say that, I don't have any direct knowledge of them, but I have read the report and I've seen what Christopher Wray and what our national security advisors under the Biden administration have said. And they have come out and said that there are terrorist cells and that there are things that we should be concerned about because of our lax southern border. And we have seen multiple individuals. We have had over 100, what was it, 139 uh, people that were basically captured, or groups that were captured on the southern border that have terrorist connections.
Yeah.
Uh, and if you capture 139, how many of them have actually gotten through? And remember, Mohammed Atta,
Mm-hmm.
one of the 9/11
Mm-hmm.
uh, conspirators, actually had a Mexican consular card, and he got into the United States illegally, but used that Mexican consular card to be a Mexican citizen in the United States illegally, to gain work, to pay for pilot classes, and
Yeah.
so forth.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
So,
Many of those terrorists of 9/11 resided in San Diego at the time because that's right on the border of
that's
Tijuana,
yeah,
Mexico, and they came right across the border, and they were training at these, airports, private airports or smaller airports in San Diego and elsewhere. So absolutely, they're here now, and I think this is a real. Orlando brings up a very important message here because there's the Chinese nationals who are here who want to do us harm, but there's people from all over the world, including people in the Middle East that desperately want to do American citizens harm.
Tom, you
Go
bring up
ahead.
an
Yes.
actual point, and that is that you think about the Chinese nationals that want to do us harms. We heard a report even during the Biden administration about 7 months ago. ABC News, which is not a bastion of conservative conversation, but ABC News even published the fact that the Chinese nationals had Chinese national police stations in operating in New York, and
Correct.
keeping an eye and investigating and gathering intelligence on Chinese nationals in the United States and keeping
Hmm.
them in line. How can this be allowed on U.S. soil?
Yeah, you're right about that. And there are Chinese police forces in New York and elsewhere
They need to
looking
go.
for Chinese citizens to enforce Chinese law on them in the United States of America. It's crazy what's happening here. So yeah, they need to be rooted out. And we'll take one more comment here, and then we'll have to let you go here. One more comment, if Rocky, you have a moment here. Lee Santiago, who do you think got the kickbacks from the Ukrainian war? Do you think Biden or Cheney benefited from this war? What do you think, Rocky?
Lee, great question. And I know that there's been a lot of conservative talking points from friends of ours and people that we respect on conservative radio and talk, but I don't think there were any kickbacks. Believe it or not, I'm going to fight back a little bit against that. I really do not believe there were any kickbacks regarding a war in Ukraine. I believe there were kickbacks before there was a war. Now that there's a war, things are watched a lot more, and the situation on the eastern side, the central and eastern side of Ukraine, are very dire.
Mm, yeah. That was a good answer, and it's hard to say, but I would think more leaning towards the someone in the Biden family maybe getting some kickbacks, at least for maybe not directly from this war, but in previous times, there's plenty of evidence
In
of that.
previous times, so, no, listen. In previous times, we saw Burisma with
Yeah.
Biden's son,
Hmm.
absolutely, and other
Hmm.
issues. But again, that
Right.
was during peacetime. During the war situation, it's a totally different world,
Yeah.
totally different.
Always appreciate it. You're just full of insight here. Rocky Rachkovsky is a retired lieutenant colonel with the U.S. Army Reserves and a former member of the Michigan legislature and all around great guy.
Thank you very
Appreciate it
much.
so much, Rocky. Thank you for your time. We will talk
Sorry about
soon.
the lighting as well.
But no, that's fine.
You couldn't
You're
see the
good.
bags under my eyes, which is
You
good.
can see them under my eyes too. It's been a long, long week. Not a lot of sleep for either one of us.
Great to
Rocky,
see you
thanks so
again,
much.
Tom.
God bless you. We'll talk soon.
Take care.
All right, take care. Yeah, pretty amazing stuff. When you think about what a transition in a presidency means for national security and foreign affairs and our involvement in overseas conflicts and maybe reducing the number of conflicts. And I want to bring this up too because first of all, I do think that the narrative that Donald Trump is going to lead us into World War III, when in fact the world is breaking out in war right now under Joe Biden's leadership. It's absurd to go to that route. That somehow with Donald Trump coming to power, Donald Trump wants to stop these wars, and it takes strength to do that. And it's a pretty tough talk and some masculinity as well. And he said some things before that terrify the Taliban and terrify Iran and all these other, China, North Korea. He knows what they're capable of doing, and Donald Trump will fight back with a bigger red button, as he said to Kim Jong Un while he was president. But I also want to bring up this because this goes against the narrative that Donald Trump doesn't surround himself with strong women or intelligent women. When in fact, you look at his administration, and it's filled with very strong and intelligent women. One of them is this historic move that he has just made, that President-elect Donald Trump has named Susan Wiles as the first female White House chief of staff. Wiles is a veteran GOP strategist, roots tracing all the way back to Ronald Reagan's. She was the campaign scheduler in the 1980 campaign with Ronald Reagan, and she is well known and highly respected. She's got this no-nonsense approach and behind-the-scenes expertise. That's where she likes to be, running things from behind the scenes. Most people don't know who she is. Who is Susie Wiles? She's brilliant, is who she is. And she's to be credited in large part for Donald Trump's victory in his very disciplined campaign in 2024. She's often preferred to really work behind the scenes. That's kind of where she thrives. She's the brains in many respects, and she's such a strategist, and she's brilliant. She understands it, working quietly in the background. But she did receive high praise from Trump the other night, lauded her as tough, smart, and universally respected. That was during his victory speech in a celebration in West Palm Beach on Tuesday night. Well, technically Wednesday morning. And then Donald Trump brought her up on stage. You saw a little clip of her right there, calling her the ice baby, and highlighting her vital role in leading his disciplined and very effective campaign. She has a deep understanding of GOP dynamics. And she's managed a number of, Rick Scott has won 2010, the gubernatorial run in Florida. She managed that. She briefly, with John Huntsman's 2012 presidential campaign, and this new role as chief of staff in a Donald Trump administration and Donald Trump White House really does reflect her steadfast commitment to the cause, decades of experience. Very, very trusted conservative operative. So congratulations to her. I just want to bring this up. I know we're over here, but this is an important story because there are universities now around the country that are canceling classes and providing safe spaces because Donald Trump won the election. This is in response to President-elect Donald Trump's victory. Several universities across the United States have come under fire for doing this, for providing these safe spaces from Donald Trump, because the media has been lying to all these poor students for so long, and they believe this, so they've canceled classes to help students process this election outcome. We're talking about Georgetown University. We're talking about Harvard University, these elite institutions offering self-care suites with milk and cookies and coloring books, and even therapy animals for these stressed out students, because they're amplifying this message that Donald Trump is going to go after them. And this is just a ridiculous trend that, thankfully is drawing sharp criticism, arguing that, these actions just reveal this really concerning shift in higher education. There are some, there's a campus reform correspondent, a journalist, who's saying, listen, these universities are failing to prepare students for real world challenges by encouraging this level of coddling and saying that life is full of hard work, hurt feelings, sadness, and tragedy. That's what life is about. And there's a lot of critics to these universities. Yeah, they're coddling them. Milk and cookies. And a lot of critics saying, like, these universities, they're just fostering a generation ill-prepared for life's difficulties and reliant on these temporary comforts rather than resilience. One gentleman I respect greatly and have for many years, and he's a dear friend of mine, Brooks Gibbs. He's a psychologist, and he has been speaking about the children that we are raising in this country are not being taught resilience. Because the difficulties don't just end after middle school or high school is over. They continue throughout your lifetime. And if we don't teach them to be resilient in the face of bullies, for example, or people calling them names, then we're setting them up for constant hurt feelings and failure. So here they are now in high school, in college. University of Puget Sound, by the way, this is in Seattle. Students were invited to walk through labyrinths with these calming lights and engage in mindfulness activities. And then there's the University of Oregon providing baby therapy animals to soothe election anxieties. Even Harvard, I mentioned before, is offering these, attendance flexibility, with some of these professors canceling classes or making assignments optional. We understand that you're traumatized by Donald Trump winning this election, so we're going to just not require you to do homework. And, Jerry Seinfeld, good for him, the Hollywood comedian who's had great success. He's one of the critics of this. He's long questioned certain school policies and denouncing these practices as actually harmful to students. They're not developing as they should be. They're not maturing as they should be because you're coddling them like they're little babies, literally. Coloring books? Listen, young people need tools to confront adversity, not evade this. And listen, if you're disappointed that Donald Trump won the election, there are ways to deal with it. I've been disappointed in many elections, but I didn't crumble into a fetal position and start sucking my thumb. As an adult, somewhat of voting age, you dealt with it. You understood, okay, this is going to mean these policies are going to go through. But let me tell you what is not going to happen. And this is the real damage to students and the people in this country. And you have been lied to time and again by who you think you can trust. The news media and Democratic politicians who have told you, who have ramped up the fear in your own mind and have led you down a path of mental illness by claiming that if Donald Trump wins, he's going to lock you up and put you in an internment camp based on your ethnicity. That's just one of many lies that have been told. That is not going to happen. And I feel sorry for you in a good way that you have been lied to and you've been led down this manipulative path to essentially ruin your life and your mental health. All of that was not true. And I wish that social media didn't exist for that one purpose right there. So that the mental health of young people, young adults, middle-aged individuals, and even the elderly. There was an 80-something-year-old woman who attacked Trump supporters because she said this to one of them. And this is in that Puget Sound area in Seattle. An elderly woman went up to a person and she said to that person with a Trump banner that the person was carrying, she went up to him and said, "How can you vote for Donald Trump when you have brown skin?" And then she hit her. She attacked a person for two reasons. She has brown skin and she's supporting Donald Trump. Thankfully, she was arrested for a hate crime because you cannot target people based on the color of their skin. This person who says that she is anti-racist was exhibiting racism in that very moment. And this is what I've said before, critical race theory leads to. You target people based on their skin and assume because the color of their skin, because of their immutable trait, they need to act in a certain way. And if they don't, you can attack them. That is racism right there. And it's all based on a lie. And I feel bad for that elderly woman who is now facing, hopefully, jail time for a hate crime against a Trump supporter who happened to have brown skin. Anyway, that's what's happening thanks to DEI, thanks to CRT, and thanks to the Democratic Party in league with the news media now in this country. I hope everybody wakes up, and I hope they wake up quickly. On that note, go to church on Sunday. Have a fantastic weekend. If you'd like to join me, I'll be at Calvary Chapel in Waterford, Michigan, teaching through the book of Mark there. And we'll be talking about the Lord. We'll talk about Jesus and those types of things. It's not politics. Sometimes it kind of weaves its way in, though, doesn't it? Just because these are moral and ethical issues, as I've described before. Anyway, have a fantastic weekend. God bless you. We'll see you back here next week.